Joining me today is Marshall Koval from Lumina Gold Corp. In this interview, we discuss the price of gold and where Marshall thinks it could be heading, and we get into Lumina Gold, which, guys, I think is a really interesting story. If you think gold is going above $3,000 an ounce, or even heck, just staying at this price, I think that you should be looking at developers that have pretty big resources in the ground that offer attractive risk reward ratios. And when I look at all of the gold that they have in the ground over at the Cangrejos project, I think that Lumina Gold is a name that you absolutely have to have on your watch list. So we get into the project, what the big hurdles are, what the big risks are, and what we can expect if we choose to invest in the project over the remainder of the year. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Marshall, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for having us today. It'd be good to talk about Cangrejos a bit here.
So first off, I want to start off just talking about gold. Recently, we've had a couple of the big U.S. banks now putting out $3,000 price targets. I'm not sure how much attention you pay to the macro picture when it comes to gold, but what's your read on the gold market right now?
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot. I mean, interesting today, a 400 ounce bar of gold, a good delivery bar now is worth about $1 million, right? So gold past that 2,500 threshold, I think there's room to continue up. I think we're moving into a scenario where the Fed is going to cut rates before this year is over. Can't tell you if it's September, November, when it is. But all those things sort of bode well for gold to continue on. And you're starting to see silver move up as well. It's hit up to about $30. And I think that gap between gold and silver is going to close a bit over time here. So I'm bullish on where silver's headed. I mean, gold and silver are headed. If you look at our Cangrejos project, all the economic studies we did in the pre-feasibility study, we used 16 gold. That was in 2023. So things are the right way in the market. And at some point here, you'll start to see the gold price and the gold equities kind of move up based on that gold price. We've seen it a bit in the producers. We haven't seen it so much in the developers, but I think it'll continue.
And then that was one of the questions I was going to get into. Do you think that the Fed can win the fight against inflation here, or do you think that this is just kind of where gold and precious metals and commodities, for that matter, are going to shine when people kind of realize that the Fed's only tool is to either raise interest rates, lower interest rates, have inflation, or have deflation? We kind of know that they're always going to choose inflation over deflation. So do you think that the Fed ultimately can rein in inflation here over the next 10 years, or like could we end up back on a gold standard? What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, you've got the BRICS looking at moving towards the gold standard. That's China and Russia now. How far that'll get, and if it'll replace the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, we'll see. I think basically the Fed always seems to be late to the party and late to act. The talk of a soft landing, all that kind of stuff, I don't know where it'll end up, but I think there's a lot of pressure in the U.S. in particular, the average consumer. Just go to the grocery store and you can see the effects of inflation. So in an inflation environment, and then if the Fed does lower the interest rates, which I think will happen, you'll get a weakened dollar. So those all bode well for both gold and silver and other precious metals.
So before we get into Lumina Gold, I got to ask you about the Luminex transaction with Adventus. I'm just curious. Now that was a pretty big name in the Canadian junior markets, or a pretty big story over the last year, ultimately being bought out by Silvercorp. When you agreed to be acquired by Adventus, did you see a scenario where Adventus was going to be bought out so quickly?
We knew that Adventus had been talking to people, and they didn't have a formal process underway at all. So we knew that, first of all, both companies, Adventus and Luminex, and I was the CEO of Luminex and director of it, both companies at the stage that we started talking in September, it was around Beaver Creek last year, they were at real low valuations. I think we were trading in Luminex at mid 20s, maybe high 20 cent range Canadian. So it seemed pretty natural with the Ecuador situation, both of us having gold and copper in our portfolios to merge that. And then actually the Silvercorp transaction happened a lot quicker than I thought it would be. I remained on the board of Equinox along with Ron, or excuse me, not Equinox, Adventus, along with Ron Hallis, our COO in Lumina Gold. And basically, we were real happy with the outcome. And now if you look at since the deal closed, you've got this spike in silver and gold prices, and you've seen Silvercorp move up fairly well, and I think there's more room. So all in all, we were real happy with that transaction, and it's been a good one for shareholders.
Okay, so let's talk about Lumina now. It's the first time we've had you on the show. What's the high-level overview for Lumina?
So right now we're in a feasibility study. It should be completed in the first half of 2025. We're well advanced with the engineering, all the field work to support an updated resource estimate, a mine plan with a new reserve. All the geotech facility siting, drilling, and field work is being wrapped up as we speak. We have a large metallurgical program underway. But just to recap what it is, the PFS that we put out in 2023 at 1650 gold and 375 copper gave us a 2.2 billion NPV over a 26-year mine life at a 5% discount rate. And if you even look at a 20% up case, say $1,980 an ounce gold, basically that gives you about a 3.5 billion NPV. So Cangrejos is a really large deposit. There's some 20 million ounces of gold in resource and about 2.6 billion pounds of copper. So that has a lot of upward torque to metal prices, both gold and copper. There's a bit of silver as well. But basically, we're advancing that. We started our environmental impact statement work or assessment work. We've got negotiations with the government on investment protection agreements that'll carry us through the construction period. The initial capital on the project was about 950 million US. So it'll cover us through that. And then we're also in discussions with the government on fixing the exploitation contract terms, which would allow the project to move on to a 25-year mine life or 25-year concession life, renewable for 25 years. So we're working on all that as we speak.
Now, when I look at your company's marketing materials, you guys talk about how you guys have a cheap cost to power. Where's that coming from?
So most of the power in Ecuador is hydropower. So in the area that we're at down in El Oro province, probably about 80%, maybe 85% of the power there is hydropower generated. We're in discussions with different power providers. The government of Ecuador in the last couple of years has moved to where you could be in the national grid system or with private producers, power supply. So we're looking at power purchase agreements and we're looking at that. So we believe that you'll be sub 7 cents per kilowatt hour power. And in the private space, you may be able to negotiate down further from there.
So in a perfect world, let's just say that gold continues to maintain its momentum and you guys are able to get the capital you need to get into production. When do you think that you'd be able to start to actually pour gold?
So basically, there's a couple pieces I want to bring up on start production. We did a streaming deal with Wheaton Precious Metals, and that's been carrying us through the feasibility study. There's about 48 million for early works and feasibility study work. But then when you move to construction, basically there's 252 million. And what Wheaton gets for that is 6.6% of a gold stream of the production from a gold stream. And once you hit 700,000 ounces, it goes down to 4.4. So one of the things we already have is we have about roughly a quarter of the initial capital for production in place already with the Wheaton stream. So what we have to get through is sort of into 2025, early 2026, we should have the environmental permits and be working on all the operating permits. And then you're sort of a 2.5 year build from there is what we're looking at. So the largest unknown is how long it'll take us to get through the government permitting process and all. But like I mentioned, we're starting the environmental impact assessment work as we speak, and we'll go to public hearings early next year, mid next year.
So if I'm an investor watching the story, what's my big risks here if I'm betting on the company being able to get to production or get close enough to it to get taken out for some huge premium that I'm going to be really happy about? What am I when I think about risk here? What are these big hurdles? What are the big risks that I'm worried about?
So, we've got a really strong, robust social license. We're in an area that doesn't have indigenous communities. We've got a lot of benefits to the project. We're near infrastructure, near a port facility. So the things that you obviously have to go through is the public hearings and getting the environmental license. That's one area, and I don't think that's a risk of whether you'll get it or not. It's whether how long it takes. I think then, in a general sense, there's geopolitical risk on Ecuador. Now, having said that, I've seen Ecuador since 2014 related to mining just steadily improve over time. You have the Noboa government that's in place right now. And President Noboa actually showed up at PDAC and talked with mining companies. I met with him with a group of mining executives, and he's real pro foreign investment. He sees mining as an important way. And if you a way going forward for that, and if you look at Cangrejos, it's one of the largest projects in the country. It's on the scale of Mirador, which is a copper porphyry deposit. So it's an important investment. So we think basically you're going to continue to get support out of successive governments for the mining sector. And basically, the elections come up in February. Noboa will be, he took over Lasso's term for 18 months, and then a new president would come in May. And right now, Noboa's fought a lot of the issues with drug violence related to the cartels, and he has a real high approval rating. So we think he's in the lead now. So if he continues on and wins the next term, I think Ecuador will be in a really good place. That should lower the geopolitical risk with Ecuador. So those are two of the main things. There's not a lot of technical risk to the project, and then obviously there's always metal price risk.
Yeah, now that's another question too that I have for you, because when we talk about you guys are making substantial amounts of cash at $1,650 gold, and now gold sitting at $2,500, I assume that gold the price of gold isn't really the big factor here in being able to sell this to investors. And I know that, like, if we're talking about broad capital flows, it's been a struggle for everybody. And just watching your guys' story, I think it's really fascinating that there's not a whole bunch of investors hopping in, because I mean, we were talking north of a $3 billion NPV at today's gold prices.
Yeah.
Is that the big question that you're having when you're talking to some of the more sophisticated institutional type investors, is just trying to get them comfortable with the geopolitical risk?
Well, that's one thing, but also if you look at the ownership structure of the company, it's not a highly liquid stock like some of the gold producers, for instance. Ross Beatty has about 27% of the stock. There's an Ecuadorian investment group that has about 16%. Management and the board have about 8%. There's a fund out of San Francisco, Route 1, that has about 6%. So that's 50 some percent of probably 52, 53% of the stock is held by long-term investors. So there's not a big liquidity issue, and I think that kind of weighs a bit on the share price for those bigger institutions to come in. But hopefully as time goes on and they realize the value, like you stated there, we'll see more activity, particularly as more of these larger generalists come into the market and move down into the development space from the producers.
So if I'm an investor watching this right now and I'm interested in the company moving forward, and I want to evaluate the timelines and how management's doing and that sort of stuff, what is it that I can expect in terms of milestones, sort of goals that the company's working towards? What should I be watching for over, say, the remainder of the year?
So we'll start to have some metallurgical test results coming out. You know, that doesn't always move the needle, but it's an important part of the revenue story of the project. Also, the negotiations with the government of Ecuador on these investment protection agreements and the exploitation contract terms. Basically, the exploitation contract terms, you're negotiating the royalty rate for the project going forward. So we've been in discussions with the government. That'd be another one. And then probably the biggest milestone is into the first half of next year's completion of the feasibility study. So that's we're looking at, you know, towards the tail end of the second quarter, having that done. And that was part of the Wheaton agreement also, is we had to have that feasibility study delivered by then. We're on schedule. We're on track with that now.
All right. Well, Marshall, thanks very much for hopping on here. I think you guys have a really interesting story, a gigantic asset that wouldn't surprise me as gold continues to gain momentum, to see your name really start to catch fire as we start to see capital flows trickle down and everybody kind of look towards those great developer assets. I think you're going to be on a lot of watch lists. So thanks for hopping on here, and hopefully you'll hop on here in the future and continue to update us as you guys move the project forward.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Go to our website and you get a lot more details on the project. So appreciate your time and your listeners' interest.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.